My name is Isabella Morales, and last Christmas Eve all of San Francisco watched as I was thrown out of my own family. Snow fell so heavily it turned Pacific Heights into a frozen painting, a rare storm, fierce, merciless, unrelenting. I stood in the middle of the slippery, steep street as the iron gates of the mansion slammed shut behind me. Security tossed my bags onto the snow-covered sidewalk, my daughter's Christmas gifts, a few old clothes, and the wool scarf my mother had left me. Not a single apology. On the brightly lit porch stood Felicia Donovan, my older sister, arms crossed, wearing a thin, cold smile sharp as a blade. Inside, music played, champagne corks popped, and more than 100 guests celebrated the greatest night of her career. Outside, neighbors raised their phones. Live streams began. Flashes lit up the dark. The whole city saw me shivering in the snow. They thought they had just gotten rid of a stain on the family, the divorced little sister, the live-in maid who depended on their charity, a failure unworthy of appearing in their perfect family photos. No one knew I had stayed silent for a very long time. No one knew I had observed every glance, every whisper. And no one knew that a truth lay dormant, something powerful enough to wipe the triumphant smiles off every face in that house. Felicia had no idea just a few hours later the past would return, and our mother would speak one last time. If you're watching this video, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay until the very end. Because this story didn't begin on Christmas Eve. It began the moment my family chose the wrong person to look down on. Growing up in San Francisco during the 80s and 90s, my family lived in a modest row house in the Sunset District, a foggy working-class neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. My parents were both immigrants. Dad came from Mexico City, Mom from a small town near Naples. They worked non-stop, driven by one unshakable belief: hard work was the only way out of poverty. Dad drove a delivery truck 6 days a week. Mom cleaned offices downtown at night. They were proud, exhausted, and always running on empty. From the very beginning, my older sister Felicia was the golden child. She was 3 years older, with dark curly hair and a smile that made strangers turn their heads. Teachers called her a genius. Coaches said she was a natural. Our parents called her the future of the family. Me, I was the quiet one. Practical. I got good grades, but never the applause. Felicia always got new clothes first. I wore hand-me-downs. Felicia took piano lessons and went to summer camp. By 12, I was delivering newspapers. By 14, I was babysitting for cash. It wasn't that they didn't love me. They did, in the limited way of people who were perpetually drained and pulled in every direction by life. Every spare dollar, every big dream went to Felicia. When she wanted to attend the private Catholic school across town, Dad took a second job. When I asked about the same school, Mom sighed. "We can't stretch that far, honey. You're smart. You'll earn scholarships." And I did. I worked weekends at a diner, saved every tip, applied for every grant, and made it into a public university. Felicia went to Stanford, full ride on top of everything else she already had. Dad died when I was 19, heart attack. Right in the cab of his truck on Highway 101. Small funeral, overwhelming grief. After that, Mom leaned even harder on Felicia. My sister had just graduated and landed a job at a tech startup. Every night, Mom called her. Felicia moved Mom into a nicer apartment in No Valley when the old house became too expensive. She handled the finances, the doctors, every major decision. Me, I was still in school, working double shifts, just trying to keep my head above water. Mom would say Felicia is going to make something of this family, as if I didn't exist. At 25, Felicia married Patrick Donovan, tall, charming, from an old Irish money family in Marin. Together, they founded a food tech company. Investors loved them. Forbes put them on the 30 under 30 list. Mom beamed whenever anyone mentioned her older daughter. I got married too young to a man who seemed stable. I had Savannah at 23. Mom came to the hospital, held her granddaughter, and the first thing she said was, "She has Felicia's eyes." 4 years later, the marriage fell apart. He left me with a small child and a mountain of bills. I moved into a tiny apartment in the Mission, worked 2 jobs, relied on childcare subsidies. Felicia offered help, but it always came with that air of charity. "You can stay in our guest house," she said, "but there have to be rules." By then, Mom was living with Felicia full-time. The cancer moved fast. In her final months, she was mostly in Felicia's new Pacific Heights mansion. I visited when I could, brought Savannah, sat by the bed. Mom squeezed my hand and whispered, "You need to take care of your sister. She's carrying the whole family now. Mom passed 5 years ago." The funeral felt like Felicia's stage. She delivered the eulogy, tears, perfectly timed, voice steady and flawless. I stood at the back of the room holding Savannah, feeling like a guest at my own mother's goodbye. Afterward, people kept telling Felicia, "Your mother was so proud of you." No one said it to me. A week later, I got a call from a lawyer I'd never heard of, Barbara Becker. She asked me to come in alone. That was the moment everything started to shift. I didn't know yet just how much it would change my life. But as we stepped into adulthood, the rules of the game changed too. And the favoritism, not only did it not disappear, it grew colder and sharper than ever. By my mid-20s, I thought I had life figured out. I met a guy at the restaurant where I waited tables. Charming, confident, promised me stability. We got married fast in a small courthouse ceremony with just a few friends. Savannah came along when I was 23, a bright-eyed baby with my dark hair and a laugh that lit up the room. For a while, it felt like I'd finally built something solid, something separate from the shadow of Felicia's success. But the cracks showed early. He hated the long hours I worked to pay off student loans. He resented the way Savannah's cries interrupted his sleep, his games, his plans. When money got tight, he started staying out late, coming home with excuses that didn't add up. One night, he packed a bag and said he needed space. Space that turned permanent. The divorce papers came 6 months later. I signed them in the kitchen of our cramped apartment while Savannah napped in the next room. No alimony, minimal child support that rarely arrived on time. I was 27, a single mom starting over with nothing but determination, and a toddler who needed me to be strong. Felicia, meanwhile, was climbing. Her food tech startup with Patrick was getting seed funding, magazine profiles, invitations to exclusive events in the city. She'd call occasionally, offer advice, wrapped in concern. "You should think about going back to school, Kendra. Waiting tables isn't a career." I'd bite my tongue and thank her. Then Mom got sick. The diagnosis hit like a truck. Stage 4, aggressive. I took extra shifts to help with medical bills, drove her to appointments when Felicia was slammed with investor meetings. In the hospital, Mom's hand felt paper thin in mine. She talked about Felicia's latest pitch, how proud she was of the company valuation. She barely mentioned my name. When Mom died, the grief hollowed me out. I expected the reading of the will to be straightforward. The apartment to Felicia, maybe a small keepsake for me. Instead, a week after the funeral, I got a letter from an attorney I'd never heard of, Barbara Becker. She asked me to come to her office downtown alone. I sat across from her polished desk, Savannah coloring quietly in the corner. Barbara slid a thick folder toward me. "Your mother established a trust 5 years before her passing," she said. "The principal amount after taxes is $300 million. You are the primary beneficiary. There's also an education fund for Savannah. $5 million with Felicia named as co-trustee to maintain family harmony." I stared at the numbers until they blurred. $300 million. From Mom's quiet investments years ago, before the cancer, before everything. Barbara explained the confidentiality clauses, the legal protections. "Your mother wanted you protected," she said. "She worried about how money changes people." I drove home in a daze. That night, after putting Savannah to bed, I sat on the floor of my tiny living room and thought about every time Felicia had looked down at my jobs, my apartment, my life. Every time she'd positioned herself as the family savior. I thought about Mom's last words, always circling back to Felicia's achievements. I made a decision then. No announcements, no celebrations. I'd keep the money hidden and see who my family really was when they thought I had nothing. If they loved me for me, great. If not, at least I'd know. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Felicia called a month later. Patrick and I are expanding the company. We need a live-in housekeeper and nanny. Reliable, discreet. The pay's decent and you'd have weekends with Savannah here instead of that cramped place you're in. Her voice dripped with generosity. I heard the subtext, "Come work for us, stay in your lane." I said yes. Moved into the staff quarters of their Pacific Heights mansion with Savannah's things in 2 suitcases. From day one, the lines were drawn. Felicia introduced me to her investor friends as our wonderful help. She's family, actually. The laugh that followed always landed like a slap. Patrick avoided eye contact in the hallways, muttering quick hellos before disappearing into his office. I cooked organic meals for their pitch dinners, folded laundry, while listening to Felicia brag about valuations on speakerphone. I drove Savannah to her private school in the Presidio, picked her up, helped with homework at the kitchen table after the real family had eaten. Savannah, sharp as ever, started asking questions. Why does Aunt Felicia talk to you like you're the maid, Mom? You're her sister. I'd smile and say, "It's complicated, baby. Just focus on your spelling words." But I saw the confusion in her eyes, the way she hesitated before hugging Felicia goodnight. The first real sting came at a company barbecue in their backyard. Felicia pulled me aside in front of a group of venture capitalists. "Kendra, could you refresh the drinks? We're out of the sparkling." The men chuckled. One said, "Good help is hard to find these days." Felicia beamed like she'd scored a point. Patrick watched from across the patio, drink in hand, saying nothing. Those early months set the tone. I kept my head down, did the work flawlessly, and waited. A year in the subtle digs turned routine, but nothing prepared me for what came that November. I was in the kitchen prepping dinner when my phone buzzed with an email from Barbara. The subject line was simple. Urgent. Trust activity. I stepped into the pantry to read it, heart already pounding. Barbara's message was clinical, attached forensic reports that made my stomach drop. Felicia had quietly transferred $2,800,000 from Savannah's education trust over the past 18 months. The money had gone straight into the company accounts, labeled as long-term educational investments and consulting fees. The startup was bleeding cash. Over-expansion, bad hires, investors pulling back. Patrick and Felicia were desperate, using Savannah's future to plug the holes. I sat on a stool in the dim light, reading the numbers again and again. My daughter's college fund, her security, the one thing Mom had set aside specifically for her granddaughter, siphoned off to keep up appearances. Barbara wrote that the final tranche was scheduled for offshore transfer in weeks. Once it left U.S. jurisdiction, recovery would be nearly impossible. I didn't sleep that night. Savannah was asleep down the hall in the guest room we'd turned into hers. I watched her breathe and felt something harden inside me. The test was over. They'd failed spectacularly. The company's annual Christmas party was the biggest event of their year. Black tie held in the mansion, packed with venture capitalists, tech press, potential saviors for their sinking ship. Over 100 guests, champagne flowing, Felicia in her element. I decided that night would be the reckoning. I called Barbara the next morning from a coffee shop downtown. She was calm, prepared. "We have everything. Bank records, forged documents, timestamps. I can be there with copies for key guests and law enforcement on standby." I told her to wait for my signal. The week leading up to Christmas felt endless. Felicia was in full hostess mode, menus, decorators, dress fittings. She barely looked at me except to give orders. Then 3 days before the party, she asked me to come to her home office. Patrick was there too, standing by the window. Felicia sat behind the desk like a CEO delivering bad news. Kendra, we need to talk about the party. She slid a check across the wood. $100,000. This is for you. More than fair. Take it, move out after the holidays, find a place in another state. Reduce visits with Savannah to summers and major holidays. It's better for everyone. She needs stability role models who understand success. Patrick shifted but stayed silent. Felicia continued, voice smooth. You've been helpful, but your presence confuses things. People talk. Investors ask questions. We can't have distractions right now. She leaned forward. If you make this difficult, we'll have to involve lawyers. Visitation isn't set in stone. I looked at the check, then at her. And if I say no? Her smile thinned. Then we'll do what's necessary to protect Savannah's future. I left the check on the desk and walked out. Christmas Eve arrived with that freak snowstorm. Beautiful from inside the mansion, brutal outside. The party was in full swing when I finished my shift and went to collect Savannah early. She wanted to spend the actual holiday night at our old apartment tradition, hot chocolate and movies. Felicia met me at the door herself, already in her red gown, guests milling behind her. You're not seriously leaving now, she said, voice low but sharp. We have important people here. I'm taking my daughter home. Her face changed. She signaled security. 2 guys in suits who'd always been polite to me. Escort her out. All her things too. We're done with this arrangement. They hesitated, but Felicia's glare won. My bags were brought down, presents included. Guests watched from the foyer as security carried everything to the sidewalk. Snow was piling up fast. Felicia followed us out onto the porch, arms crossed against the cold, that same wicked smile cutting across her face as phones came out to record. Merry Christmas, Kendra, she called loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. Time to know your place. The door shut. I stood there in the swirling white, Savannah's small hand in mine, watching the lights twinkle inside like nothing had happened. I squeezed her fingers. It's okay, baby. Trust me. An hour later, everything changed. An hour later, everything changed. I drove through the storm to a downtown hotel, changed into the midnight blue gown I'd bought months ago and never worn, and called Barbara. She arrived with a discreet security detail and a slim briefcase. We returned together in a black town car, snow still swirling under the streetlights. The valet at the mansion took one look at the car and straightened up. Inside, the party was peaking. Orchestra playing holiday classics, champagne towers, gleaming investors in tuxedos laughing too loud. Felicia was center stage, working the room in her red silk dress, Patrick at her side, shaking hands. I walked in with Barbara on my arm. Heads turned. Whispers started immediately. Felicia spotted me across the foyer and froze mid-sentence, glass halfway to her lips. Barbara leaned in. Ready, I nodded. We moved to the main living room where the big screen usually showed company highlight reels. Barbara had arranged for a tech contact earlier, a simple USB plug-in. The music faded as the screen lit up with Mom's face, recorded 6 months before she died, sitting in her favorite chair, frail but clear-eyed. Her voice filled the room, steady and unmistakable. If Felicia ever treats Kendra like hired help instead of blood, if she puts ambition over family, then every cent I built goes solely to Kendra and Savannah. No appeals, no exceptions. I've seen enough. The video cut to black. Silence dropped like a blade. Then Barbara took the microphone from the stunned MC. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Barbara Becker, executor of Shirley Morales' estate. Tonight, I'm here to execute her final instructions. She projected the bank records next. Transfers, dates, amounts, Felicia's digital signatures. $2,800,000 diverted from Savannah's trust into company accounts. The room erupted in murmurs, phones coming out again, but this time aimed at Felicia. A lead investor, the one they'd been courting for months, stood up first. We're out. Effective immediately. His partners followed, gathering coats. Others checked their own portfolios on phones, faces hardening as they saw the implications. Felicia's voice cracked across the room. This is a mistake. A family misunderstanding. Patrick tried to usher people toward the bar, but no one moved that way. Guests backed away, conversations turning to exits. Savannah pushed through the crowd, eyes wide but steady. She ran straight to me, wrapped her arms around my waist in front of everyone. I'm going home with you, Mom. For good. I held her tight, feeling the weight lift for the first time in years. Felicia lunged forward, reaching for Savannah's arm. Sweetheart, wait. You don't understand. Savannah pulled away. I understand plenty. The orchestra had stopped entirely. Servers stood frozen with trays. Someone killed the lights on the Christmas tree. People streamed toward the door, brushing past Felicia and Patrick without a word. Coats were fetched in silence. Cars lined up outside, engines running in the snow. Felicia's face went from red to ashen. Patrick looked like he'd been punched, staring at the emptying room as if it might refill by sheer will. Barbara handed sealed envelopes to 3 key investors, copies of everything plus a quiet word about federal reporting requirements. By the time the last guest left, the mansion felt hollow. Music stands, abandoned glasses half full on every surface. Felicia sank onto a sofa, makeup streaked. Patrick paced, phone to his ear, voice rising with each unanswered call. I took Savannah's hand. We walked out together into the quiet snow. The weeks that followed brought the real storm. The weeks that followed brought the real storm. Federal investigators moved fast. Barbara had already handed everything over to the U.S. Attorney's Office. The paper trail was airtight. One gray January morning, agents arrived at the company's Soma headquarters, boxes in hand. By noon, the headlines were everywhere across tech blogs. Food tech darling Donovan Enterprises under federal investigation for trust fund embezzlement. Felicia's arrest came 2 weeks later. She was leaving a closed-door crisis meeting with her lawyers when agents intercepted her in the lobby. There was no chase, no spectacle. Just quiet handcuffs and a slow walk past employees who suddenly couldn't meet her eyes. The charge sheet was merciless wire fraud, embezzlement from a minor's trust, money laundering. All federal counts, all carrying real time. The trial moved quickly. Felicia's defense framed it as aggressive accounting done in the name of family, but the jury wasn't persuaded. Prosecutors laid out the transfers like a map, clean, methodical, impossible to explain away. 8 years in federal prison. No parole for the first 85%. When the verdict was read, Felicia stood frozen in her tailored designer suit, finally looking small. The company collapsed almost overnight. Investors demanded repayment. Creditors closed in. A Chapter 7 bankruptcy filing hit the courts before spring. Assets were liquidated, office furniture auctioned, intellectual property sold for pennies on the dollar to a competitor. The brand once featured in Forbes disappeared from app stores as if it had never existed. The Pacific Heights mansion was next. Once the loans defaulted, the bank foreclosed. Auction day drew a crowd, tech reporters, former neighbors, people who had once begged for invitations to those glittering parties. A real estate investment group bought it cheap, planning to carve it into condos. Felicia's carefully curated life, the art, the wine cellar, the custom kitchen where I had cooked countless meals, was scattered through an estate sale. Patrick filed for divorce the day after the indictment. His lawyers argued separate assets, no knowledge of the transfers. He kept just enough to start over quietly, but the social damage was complete. Invitations stopped. His country club membership vanished. Old friends crossed the street to avoid him. A man who once networked effortlessly now sat alone in coffee shops, staring at a phone that never lit up. Through Barbara, I heard Felicia wrote letters from prison, apologies, explanations, requests for visits. They were returned unopened. Patrick tried once through a mutual acquaintance, asking if I'd consider a settlement to keep things civil for Savannah. I didn't reply. Their circle evaporated. People who had toasted them at galas now claimed they'd always sensed something was wrong. In Silicon Valley, the story flipped fast from power couple to cautionary tale. Felicia began her sentence at a low-security facility in Dublin, California. Reports said she kept to herself, took accounting classes, avoided eye contact in the yard. Patrick moved into a small condo in Oakland, accepted a mid-level job at a logistics firm, and faded into anonymity. The fallout was no longer loud. It was quiet, methodical, an erasure. But some reactions cut deeper than any courtroom ever could. The first letter from Felicia arrived 3 months into her sentence. Thin prison stationery, her handwriting careful, restrained, slightly unsteady. She wrote about the routine, the meals, the head counts, the sameness of days, and the regret that kept her awake at night. She said the classes were teaching her about accountability, that she finally understood how deeply she'd hurt Savannah and me. She promised she would make amends when she got out, become the sister she should have been all along. She ended with "Please, forgive me," underlined twice. I read it once, folded it neatly, and set it aside unanswered. More letters followed. Some described therapy sessions. Others mentioned small, unexpected kindnesses from fellow inmates. Each carried the same request: a visit, a phone call, some sign that the door hadn't closed completely. Savannah spotted one on the kitchen counter and asked what it said. I told her the truth. She shrugged. She had years to be better. Patrick took a different route, indirect, always through someone else. A mutual cousin called first, saying Patrick was struggling, asking whether I'd consider a quiet loan to keep his last vendor contracts alive. Then a former investor emailed casually, dropping Patrick's name, suggesting a family reconciliation fund might help smooth things over with regulators. Finally, Patrick's new attorney sent a formal letter, a proposal for mediation, partial restitution from remaining assets in exchange for a statement of support. Barbara forwarded it with a single line: no obligation. Say the word and it disappears. I said the word. When the refusals stacked up, the tone changed. It started subtly: anonymous posts on local parenting forums questioning how a former housekeeper could suddenly afford elite legal counsel. Then came the burner accounts on Instagram and Twitter reposting old photos from Felicia's feed with captions like, "Some people destroy families out of jealousy." A private Pacific Heights moms Facebook group buzzed with threads about toxic relatives who weaponize money. Felicia's former friends, women who once sipped rosé on her patio, shared vague stories about betrayal and greed. One tagged a charity gala photo with "Be careful who you call family." Patrick, quieter but no less present, liked and reshared posts, implying I'd engineered everything for personal gain. Relatives I hadn't heard from in decades resurfaced. An aunt from Sacramento called in tears, insisting blood was thicker than mistakes, warning that locking Felicia away would haunt me. A second cousin in San Jose sent long emails about forgiveness and Christian duty. Every message carried the same unspoken demand: let it go, help them rebuild, don't be cruel. The harassment peaked one weekend when a gossip site ran an insider piece claiming I'd hidden the inheritance during Mom's final days to punish Felicia. The comments exploded, strangers calling me heartless, accusing me of elder financial abuse. Savannah came home from school shaken. Classmates had seen it. We turned off notifications, locked down our profiles, but the noise clung to the air. I hired a service to erase the worst of it. Barbara sent cease and desist letters that silenced the loudest voices. Slowly the storm lost momentum. Attention drifted elsewhere, as it always does. Felicia's letters stopped. Patrick's intermediaries fell quiet. The harassment left scars, but it also drew a final, unmistakable line. And years later, a new chapter began. Years later, a new chapter began. Savannah and I moved into a light-filled house in the Sunset District, the same neighborhood where I'd grown up, but this time on our own terms. 3 bedrooms, a small garden, fog rolling in every evening like clockwork. No staff quarters, no guest wing, just a space that felt unmistakably like home. We painted Savannah's room a deep teal. She chose herself hung photos from trips we'd taken together, Big Sur, Yosemite, even a quick spring flight to New York. Simple things that felt extravagant after everything we'd lived through. I kept the inheritance invested conservatively enough for stability without spectacle. The real shift came when I started the foundation small, at first focused on single mothers working service jobs across the Bay Area. Childcare grants, emergency housing funds, scholarships for night classes. We named it the Morales Forward Fund. The first year we helped 40 women. By the third, more than 200. I spoke on panels, visited community centers, but mostly worked quietly, reviewing applications, making calls, watching lives change without applause. Savannah grew into someone I barely recognized in the best way. She transferred to a public arts high school across the city and threw herself into theater and debate. Her confidence sharpened the kind forged through chaos. She came home talking about auditions, college essays, friends who knew her story and respected it. One night, she showed me a monologue she'd written about choosing your own family. "It's not autobiographical," she said, smiling. I knew better. She never asked about Felicia or Patrick. When distant relatives reached out on birthdays, she'd read the messages, shrug, and delete them. We blocked numbers, changed emails when necessary. The boundary was absolute, and it gave us both room to breathe. I dated sparingly a teacher, a graphic designer, but nothing lasted until I met someone who knew me only as the mom helping at school bake sales. He didn't care about the money. He didn't flinch at the past. We moved slowly, building something steady out of ordinary evenings, takeout board games, long walks along Ocean Beach. The old weight lifted over time. No more pretending. No more measuring myself against someone else's definition of success. Mornings became coffee on the back porch, watching Savannah sprint for the bus. Evenings were her recounting rehearsals, and me listening, really listening. Looking back, the money didn't save me. It only gave me choices. What saved us was deciding who we wanted to be when no one was watching. Money strips away pretense. It reveals people when the power shifts. Felicia and Patrick showed me who they were. I chose peace over reconciliation. If there's one thing I hope you take from this, it's that family isn't defined by blood or bank accounts. It's defined by who shows up when you're broke, when you're broken, when there's nothing to gain. Sometimes the healthiest choice you can make is to close the door and lock it. Savannah leaves for college next fall. Theater program in Southern California. She earned it with talent and grit, scholarships covering most of the cost. We'll drive down together, windows open, music loud, new roads, new stories, and that is the real inheritance. The freedom to write the next chapter without the old one dragging behind. Thank you for listening to mine.